There's no doubt that the glamping industry is getting more competitive. So how do you survive that extra competition and yet still manage to attract the guest numbers that you need? One of the best ways of doing this is to make sure your service is so unique. People are talking about it around the world. One of the things you can do there is to make sure your structure is so unique. My next guest has been responsible for some of the most unique structures around the world, from bamboo structures to those in the shape of stingrays. Welcome to episode 61. Glamping and unique holiday rentals are surging in popularity with the growing desire of customers to book holidays that deliver an experience. They are also the new business of choice for those wanting to improve their work-life balance. So how do you build a strong business like this that gives you the life you need and a great investment? I'm Sarah Riley, and I want to share what I've discovered after being immersed in this industry for over 20 years to inspire you to find out more about what's going on. Welcome, this is the business of glamping and unique holiday rentals. Louis, it's absolutely amazing that you've joined me here today. We've met a couple of times now. I always am amazed by the new projects that you're starting, but what you actually do is quite complex. So I'm going to get you to summarize what you do and to give listeners an idea, a bit of a taster, a bit of a flavor of your day-to-day in the office.
Okay, so I'm in a rather bizarre situation that my background is in the luxury hospitality sector. So I worked for a company called Six Senses Resorts and Spas for about 9 years, helping them put together their sustainability guidelines. And then back in 2011, after working with some very interesting people in the sort of luxury hotel design sector, I started Nomadic Resorts, which is our first company, which is essentially an architectural and landscape design company. So we specialized in tensile membrane structures, but sort of very high-end luxury tinted pods, basically. So that was the first thing we did. But we'd already had a pretty significant experience of designing with bamboo, and we had several fairly well-known bamboo projects under our belt. So our first major project really started in 2014, I guess, which was when we did a project called Wild Coast Tented Lodge. And that project is kind of indicative of what we do, really, because we sort of did everything. So we did the architectural design, the landscape design, the interior design, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design. And then we were also the main contractor for the tented units and for the bamboo structures. So that was a pretty big job. But that project, which was in a remote corner of Sri Lanka called Yala National Park, was pretty successful. And so since then, we've sort of branched out into a couple of different new areas. So I suppose the most important one was that we continued going ahead with the bespoke design services for private individuals and hotel companies developing bamboo buildings for them. So we work with some of the top hotel companies like Banyan Tree, Resplendent Ceylon, and Playa Viva in Mexico. And we'll design specific kind of iconic bamboo buildings for them. And then we also had a separate company, which is Nomadic Spaces, which we re-engineered some tent models that we'd been working on. And basically, we created a series of insulated, low impact, glazed tent models for the sort of higher end glamping sector. So we have a second company based in Cape Town, which really does the kind of supply chain management, logistics, and installation of those tents. And then we have a third company, which we launched in COVID, which is Nomadic Escapes, which is a tented camp management company, which is with some former colleagues from Six Senses, and we decided we would design, build, and manage our own tented camps as from 2024.
It's an incredible amount. And I just don't know how you have time to breathe. You have let's focus first on the nomadic resorts. So you have their architectural and landscape design, and it's all focused on green building projects, really, isn't it? And you like to, my understanding is that you like to focus on also biophilic design. Is that right? Can you explain that term and how you focus on that with your design?
Yeah, I think it's actually at the core of the whole kind of outdoor lodging stroke glamping appeal, really. There was a evolutionary biologist called E.O. Wilson, who basically concluded through his work that human beings have an innate need to connect with nature, and that it's something that was fundamental to human survival. So, to give you an example, the caveman who could remember the path to get to the mushroom patch had a higher chance of survival than the caveman who was wandering around and couldn't remember where he was and didn't find any mushrooms and starved to death. So it's not quite as simple as that, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. So basically, what the claim is that human beings have these kind of innate affiliations with nature, both for hunting and for gathering, and that those are intrinsic to our personal well-being. So what's happened in our modern society is there's been a slow, especially, you could call it the, internalization of humanity. So we've all gone indoors, and what that's created is a number of different things. Notably, you've got literally thousands of biological receptors in your body that react to natural daylight. So that's super critical. If you don't go outside, you're probably not just going to have vitamin deficiencies, but you're probably going to have some serious mental health issues in the long run as well. And then the second thing is that there have been a number of studies on biophilic design which have discovered that it's actually very positive for your physical and mental health. So to give you an idea, there's some very strange studies which are quite interesting. For example, over a period of 30 years, some psychologists studied a prison. And on one side of the prison block, you had views over beautiful rolling mountains. And on the other side of the prison block, the windows gave onto a sort of dingy courtyard full of people stabbing each other. And they studied recidivism, which is, repeat offending over that 30-year period. And what they discovered, whether I don't think it could be coincidental given the data, but fundamentally, the people who had a nice view tended not to go back to prison quite as often as the people who had a horrible view. And then they expanded that into education system. They found that classrooms with natural light and natural ventilation, students had a higher performance. Then they looked at some very simple, weird things like they put a aquarium into a dentist waiting room, and they did a sort of before and after study and found that once the aquarium was installed, people had a lower perception of pain. So all of these things have led to a number of interesting conclusions. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is that in a highly stressed urban environment, people will tend to be happier if they've spent periods of time in an environment in which they can reconnect with their natural environment.
I've also seen some of those studies, and they talk about how it not only has health benefits, it has environmental benefits and economic benefits, because as you're saying, people are happier, they can work better and they're more efficient. And this is in the work environment we're talking about. And how do you translate that into something that you then provide for the modern traveller today? How do you think through that process and apply that to your designs?
So I think the first thing is that we don't design camps and resorts in a normal traditional architectural process we do something a little bit, it's kind of reverse engineering, where basically we will identify the experiences we want to provide and then develop the design of the buildings and the landscape to deliver that experience to its maximum capacity, let's say. So how that might be is it could be, there's some very simple things like natural daylight, natural ventilation, views of nature, water features. Surprisingly enough, there's a whole fascinating subject of a regenerative landscape and insects and wildlife, and being able to interact and listen to complex biological environments. And then there's also things like, the use of natural materials, which have patina or which are visually complex. So, plastic, for example, has no texture, so to speak, it's just smooth. Whereas things that have natural texture tend to have a better effect on human well-being. Then there's also some other things where you can use iconography. You can integrate imagery of animals or insects or plants into the environment through the interior design, which will also stimulate this biophilic sense in people. And then you can do some other things where you basically provide the tools to admire nature in the environment. So that might be, telescopes for looking at stars at night. That could be, providing binoculars for bird watching and a field guide. That could be creating outdoor spaces to do exercise, for example. You might, equip rooms with a meditation cushion, or even something more dynamic like a TRX be able to do sports activities outdoors. But fundamentally, there's a whole range of different tools that can be created or adapted to encourage people to interact with their environment in a more holistic way.
And you've designed some really iconic things. A friend of the show, David Leventhal, was on talking about his bamboo treehouse, Playa Viva. And I don't think there's very many people in this industry or who want to get into this industry that haven't seen images of his amazing structure, which you were part of. And so how important is it for you to actually design something that strong and that iconic so that it literally gets passed around the internet and everyone gets to see it? It kind of almost is a viral design that people want to talk about and want to share. How important is that for you?
Not really that important, actually. I mean, we don't go out and say, okay, we're going to create something viral that's Instagrammable. We just definitely don't do that. We have a design process where we take our inspiration from nature. So we use biomimicry to develop unusual structures. But it depends an awful lot on the client. So, for example, David was in many ways a fascinating client and an ideal client in that he was very kind of involved and knew what he wanted to achieve. And he also had a very unusual attitude in that he knew who his product was going to appeal to because he knew his clientele at Playa Viva. So it's a little bit of a boho chic yogi wellness retreat with some really cool clients. I think it's probably a really cool place to hang out. But rather than saying to us, I want this, it needs to be air conditioned, needs to have a mini bar, needs to have all of these conventional requirements for a traditional hotel room, he was like, no, we don't want that. We want to create something where a very certain specific type of person will adore it and they will go and stay there. And people who were looking for a conventional Marriott hotel room, they're just not going to want to go and stay there in one of those tree houses. So it's right on the beach. You can hear the waves very, very clearly. It's completely naturally ventilated. There's no AC. So it's a very particular kind of experience. But when you get the right client or the right person goes to visit, sometimes they, if that building correlates with their aspirations and dreams, then people can have a transformative experience in that environment. And I think that was one of the things as a journalist from Travel and Leisure who stayed at that tree house during a lunar eclipse. And yeah, I think she basically got, I don't know, more than her money's worth. She really had an experience that kind of changed her life. So yeah, we don't really design things specifically for social media or whatever. We design things according to our intuition, using a process, and it just happens that maybe that ends up being something that has a broader general appeal.
So with your nomadic spaces, so is this your company that designs canvas structures? Tell me a bit more about that.
No, we don't use canvas structures because we work with the environment, and we discovered very early on that typical cotton canvas just doesn't last in a humid tropical environment with the insects, fungi, and heavy rains and humidity. So we've always used tensile membrane fabrics, which is slightly different. It's a PVDF fabric, sort of coated polyester, but it has a huge advantage in that it has a very, very long lifespan. So I was talking to someone just recently who'd done the 4 Seasons tented camp in Chiang Mai, and that's nearly 20 years old, and they use the same PVDF fabric. It's never been changed. So that's a long-term fabric structure. And then we also have a galvanized steel skeleton, let's call it, which is typically designed to withstand wind speeds of 140 kilometers an hour. But we are working on a project here where it's going to be for 280 kilometers an hour, which is class 5 hurricane. And it's thermally insulated, so they can be air conditioned or heated, and they have double glazing. So it's very different from traditional tent. You know, you've got a lockable door, you've got a certain amount of security, you've got a thermally efficient building envelope, and you can be pretty sure you're not going to be blown away during a storm. Basically, sort of super heavy duty tents, and each model has been inspired by some kind of natural phenomenon. The loofah was inspired by a cocoon of a caterpillar. The urchin was, as you might guess, inspired by an urchin, sea urchin, and the seed pod was inspired by a seed. So all of them have some kind of biomimicry narrative behind them, and so they're very differently shaped from the traditional double-masted tents.
Sounds really interesting because you've just touched on there. So I'm not an architect. I'm not a designer. I'm a lover of the structures. I love the structures. I love the creativity that goes in behind them. And so I always pay attention to what people are coming up with. I think it's amazing. And so biophilic and biomimic are two of my favorite kind of design ethos ideas, I suppose. And some of the structures that are coming out of that, using that is amazing. And so the fact that you've used that in your designs, the biomimic, is fantastic. And I'm going to have a quick look at some of those structures you were talking about there. So I've seen some of them, but I haven't seen the urchin one. So I'm really, really curious about what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's the what we call the test of in French a sea urchin. So you know when the sea urchins, all their spines fall off and you find the shell on the beach?
Yes.
That's what it's taken from.
Oh, wow. So I constantly find that because I live next to the beach in the UK. And so we always have little urchins, they call them sea mice here, that turn up. But I used to spend a lot of time in Greece as well. And we would go fishing for sea urchins. And so, yeah, it's a very fascinating sea creature. And so I'm definitely going to have a look at that. So your third company is Nomadic Escapes, and this is where you focus on net zero carbon operations, rewilding, regenerative landscaping, and those businesses with a purposeful vision. And you provide a level of hospitality management with those. And so tell me a little bit more about that and how that came about.
So Nomadic Escapes was always the sort of longer term plan. My business partner, Anthony Payton, used to be the managing director of quite a well-known hotel group in the Indian Ocean. And what we realized is, a lot of these luxury resorts are trying to do too much. There's too many different things going on, which, as I sometimes say, means you can get taught kickboxing by the yoga instructor. And there's also these vast menus of all of these different options of internationally imported foods, and basically what we concluded was that if you boiled it down, really what many people are going to want in the future is they're going to want to do specific activities. And so what we concluded was there would be three main themes. One would be sustainability, so that all of the camps would have very strong sustainability and rewilding ethos as their kind of core foundational raison d'etre. And the second thing was wellness. We think that wellness is already and will continue to be a driving force in travel and hospitality for many reasons. But the most simplest way to explain this is, as urban environments become more polluted, more stressful, as the digital world becomes more and more stress-inducing, and the quality of traditional agricultural produce and fast food continues to degrade, people will want to go to rural spaces to basically restore themselves physically and mentally. And then the third one, which has become very important to us, is rather than doing the traditional holistic spa thing, which is uniquely focused on massages and hammams and jacuzzis, we believe that offering a small number of adventure sports to a very high level of service offers people an opportunity to do very, very specific activities. So, for example, our first camp here in Mauritius is at the Mon, which is an iconic mountain and is also the best kite surfing spot in the world. So people will come to the Nomadic Escapes at Ombalaba specifically for kite surfing. Obviously, they can do it. They've got great local food and healthy options, fantastic accommodation, great spa. But fundamentally, people will come to do outdoor sports activities. And here in Mauritius, that will be things like stand-up paddleboard, sailing, kite surfing, scuba diving, but there's also hiking and mountain biking. And then in other locations, the focus will be a little bit turned on its head. So Reunion Island, where we hope to do our next one, that will be very much focused on the experience of the volcano, intense hiking activities, canyoning, whitewater rafting, and those kind of activities. And the idea is that you could go to these destinations, and rather than just being sort of dumped down in the over-tourism hot pot of being in a queue for 3 hours to see some very mundane standard things, that we basically offer guests an opportunity to explore another side of the destination. And that's pretty much it. And so we partnered with a company called Deep Nature, who will do the spas, and those spas will be developed so that if you come back from a mountain biking ride, you will have a specific spa therapy that corresponds with the activity you did during the day.
Mm. So why is it important for you to partner with net zero carbon projects? Why is that your priority?
I think there's a lot of different ways. It's just personal responsibility. I think that's going to be the key thing. Well, with the resorts will never be net zero carbon from the construction, but they can be so through the operation. So I like to give an example that a lot of people probably don't know, is that in your typical hotel room, probably 70 to 85% of the energy consumed is in air conditioning. So let's say if you take a 24 square meter hotel room, you might have, let's say, 70 cubic meters of space. And basically what you're doing is you're air conditioning 70 cubic meters of space while you sleep for 8 hours, when you're only actually occupying sort of 4 cubic meters around the bed. So there's a lot of different things where, we don't necessarily do things that make an awful lot of sense. And using bioclimatic design, natural ventilation, renewable energies and energy efficient appliances and devices, we can really reduce hugely the environmental impact of these resorts. And, hopefully at some point in the future, we will be able to, build regenerative resorts using material grown on the site or in the local landscape with an extremely low carbon footprint. What we might find is that some of these new technologies like 3D printing may allow us to do that in a slightly different way than people might expect now.
So you work a lot with people who have regenerative projects, and that's what you like to support. So for listeners who don't understand what a regenerative project is, can you give just a quick flavour of what's involved with that?
Okay, so traditionally we talk about sustainability in all sorts of industries. And sustainability is about protecting the status quo. So it's closely associated with conservation. But some well-known environmental activists, notably George Monbiot, have made some very interesting comments about this recently. And one of them was that at each generation, the status quo is degraded. So people use a baseline and a reference of their own experience of wildlife from their childhood as the norm. But very often, that norm is a depleted environment. And what they found recently is when they look back at historical accounts of exploration across the world, the level of wildlife in different environments was massively different to what it is today. So, for example, Newfoundland, the cod fisheries in Newfoundland, the first accounts say that you could barely get to the shore because the shoals of cod were literally so abundant that you could barely kind of get off the boat and walk to the shore. They've also found some huge differences in the sizes of fish caught in the 18th century and those caught today. So if you take a regenerative philosophy, you ask yourself, is it possible not just to maintain that status quo and the environmental status quo that shifting baseline that has been degraded over multiple generations, but instead to say, what is the potential of this space? How can you enhance this landscape to have the level of biotic abundance that it would have historically had prior to man's intervention?
So putting more back in than taking out. So not only keeping to that level of status quo, but absolutely, giving credit, I suppose. So it's almost like a bank, you're putting more in than you're taking out. I mean, these regenerative partners that you work with, they obviously have a lot of challenges every single day or every week, every project, whatever. What do you think their biggest challenges are at the moment across the board? Is there any one particular challenge, or do you think it's very unique to the location, the challenges they're facing?
I think fundamentally there's the most important challenge is the lack of a fair playing field. If you operate I'm not going to say a name, but let's say a well-known big hotel brand, conventional build resort in which all of the environmental externalities are ignored, then you have a competitive advantage over somebody who is trying to respect the natural capital of that environment in which they operate. So that's fundamentally one thing, right? Is some guy who fossil fuel companies get, I think it's $5.7 trillion of subsidies a year, for example. And if those externalities were to be integrated into the balance sheet of a traditional resort, they would have to pay up, right?
Mm.
Whereas, someone like David, who's really, really made it a sort of life mission to do the best he can and to create edible landscape and permaculture gardens and restoration of turtle hatcheries and many other activities. They basically at a financial disadvantage because those activities cost them more. Okay, they might get more guests or different kinds of guests, or they might have higher paying guests. But fundamentally, I think until appropriate legislation is introduced to force some of these very damaging companies, I think you could safely say, to take responsibility for their actions, then those who are trying to do the right thing will always be at a competitive disadvantage. And that's a bit of a shame. But other than that, I think probably providing this, similar level of comfort is more challenging thermally, just because when you're trying to achieve that with much less energy, that's difficult. And then obviously, your menu is probably not going to be as diverse as, I mean, I was in Vietnam just recently, and I was astonished to be served salmon in pastry, which is normally something I quite like. But I was like, why am I eating sort of day glow orange salmon on a beach in Vietnam? It just makes no sense. So I think that makes it a little bit more difficult to do more elaborate and sophisticated menus. But maybe also we would hope for Nomadic Escapes that the type of people who will come will be wanting to taste local food. So yeah, there's a number of different things. It's you can't really compare them to apples for apples because they're not quite the same type of product.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with the legislation. It definitely needs to come from the powers that be, but also, the guest, the eco-tourist needs to make the decision to vote with their feet, to make the choices in their daily life, in their travel decisions that would be to experience these more regenerative resorts rather than going to places that are more damaging, for example. But it's very hard to get that message across without seeming like it's a lecture or it's telling people what to do. So I just hope very much that people see the benefit in going to places where better decisions are being made so that local communities are being supported more where the people are staying. So I'm going to ask you a very unfair question now. What is your favorite project so far? Can you actually say that you have a favorite?
I think actually, yeah, I probably can. And I think it was probably the first project that Olive and I did together, which was a project called the Treetop Dining Pod in Soneva Kiri in Thailand, which is now a long time ago. It was back in 2008, which means, yeah, it's 15 years old. So I was about 29 and Olav was 26, I think. And we were asked by my boss at that time to develop a bespoke treetop dining pod that could collect people on the forest floor and then pull them up into the forest canopy, and so they could have lunch or dinner or breakfast in the rainforest canopy in Thailand with this dramatic view over the sea. And it was very unusual to be given an opportunity like that, particularly at such a young age. And obviously nobody had experience of developing this kind of thing, but certainly we didn't have any experience because we were both kind of fresh-faced, I suppose. But that project involves basically bringing a elevator winch into the jungle and basically creating this steel and bamboo basket that could be hauled up into the 11 meters into the rainforest canopy, and so the guests could have this sort of fabulous experience of dining, surrounded by squirrels and flying squirrels and monkeys and snakes and all sorts of other things that were in this very vibrant jungle environment. And that was the first time Olav Brun and me worked together. He'd done the design, I did more or less the execution. And we used the sort of best arborists in Asia to basically do an echography on the trees using a machine called a Picus sonic tomography machine. And we had kind of the best rigging guys who did those treetop walkways, and we really had sort of a team of extraordinary individuals working on the project, and it went amazingly well. So it was one of the few projects where at the end I couldn't really find very much wrong with it, maybe a couple of minor things. Whereas all the other projects, I think, I tend to finish it and have probably 3 minutes of pleasure and then wonder what we could have done better.
So I haven't actually seen that project yet, but I have heard about it, and it's something you've got. Is it defined as farm to fork project because there's so much locally grown things, and then that all of that is transferred into this amazing produce, which is delivered to guests in the restaurant? Is that right?
Yeah.
If I got that right?
We've been doing. I've been working on farm to fork projects since 2005. I did my first farm to fork treetop restaurant in 2005 at Soneva Fushi in the Maldives. And I think all of our projects have had a farm to fork ethos backing them up. My background was in permaculture design, so the first job I got in a resort was to actually design a vegetable garden for them, and that has always stayed with us. And we've integrated edible landscaping, permaculture design, regenerative landscaping into all our projects ever since.
Yeah, amazing project. Sounds amazing. I want to go for sure. So what's next for you? What have you got on the horizon now?
We've got a lot. So I guess I'll do it in kind of order of delivery. It's probably easiest. So we've got a Rasta restaurant.
Oh yeah.
A sort of Rastafarian restaurant in Abu Dhabi, on the beach in Abu Dhabi, which we're building at the moment. So that will be probably the next thing to be completed, which is a kind of Rastafarian style bar and cafe in the center of Abu Dhabi, which has turned out great. We've got a bamboo bar in the shape of a stingray over the waters in the Maldives. So that will be afterwards. We've got 14 resort villas going into that project as well in the Maldives, but they're overwater villas, but they're not attached to a jetty. So you'll have your own little boat basically. But that's really cool. We've got a botanical garden project, an onsen spa in Taiwan. We've got a eco village, an eco resort in Dominican Republic. And then we've got our first nomadic escape here in Mauritius for a tented camp and kind of adventure sport, wellness development. And then we've got a floating resort in Kerala in India. Oh, and we've also got a hiking camp in Nepal, which has also been built there. So quite a lot.
Wow, yeah. Where in Kerala are you? That's one of my favorite places to visit.
So it's on the edge of the backwaters in Kerala.
Oh, the backwaters. Oh, I had an amazing experience there once. It's just incredible. And I've seen the Stingray project you're working on and how that came about and your thinking behind it. And again, another incredible project. All of that sounds amazing. And do you think this is kind of travel of the future? Can you see these designs and this way of thinking being the future? Is this where you see it going?
It's an interesting question. Well, there's two interesting points to that. One, it's not just travel. So we've got a lot of inquiries for residential homes, like eco homes, eco villas, off-grid residential projects. That's a new big thing that we didn't do before. But basically the travel industry is kind of pivoting towards experiential travel for a very simple reason that I don't think, is um, is negotiable. It's a simple common sense thing, right? Most people in urban environments have a level of luxury that is similar to what we would have considered a luxury hotel room 15 years ago. They've got air conditioning, they've got a fancy coffee machine that makes coffee at a press of a button. They've got a flat screen television, uber millions of pixels. They've even got a sort of Bluetooth speakers and all these different things, and the level of comfort of a typical middle class household in the developed world is extremely high. What they don't have is they don't have space, they don't have quiet, and they don't have calm. So inevitably, those things will become super valuable assets or that people will want to procure. So what we've seen over the last 15 years is with the rise of social media, whether we like it or dislike it, and probably in the latter, people want to have experiences that they can share with their personal tribe. And quite frankly, staying in the big block on the fourth floor of a big block on the beach in Tenerife is not terribly sexy on social media. Whereas, staying at the Ice Hotel or the Tree Hotel or camping in a cave in the Dolomites or, being in a gypsy caravan, all of that stuff seems to resonate better with this slightly sort of strangely competitive Instagram of travel environment. So is it going that way? Yeah, I think so. I think this whole younger generation, I think they're not interested in, they're interested in images of them jumping off a bridge into a waterfall, or sleeping in a tree house, or going on a kayaking trip and through some cave and things like that. And the days of the kind of beach lizard tourists doused with sun oil, I guess, and having a pina colada on the beach. That's, I think, a little bit behind this actually.
Yeah, that's so yesterday. I think the whole
Yeah, I mean,
self-brand
I live
thing is,
right near the beach. I never even go. I haven't sunbathed. Well, I'm gingerly, but I mean, I haven't sunbathed in 20 years now.
yeah. I suppose all of those messages now that we've got, about how being in the sun too much is a bit dangerous, actually drinking too much is a bit, but all of those things, people want to be photographing themselves and sharing that imagery of them doing amazing stuff that no one else is doing, so they can kind of say, look at us being so adventurous and doing these things, and it is all about self-brand, isn't it? People want to promote their own brand and their own thinking of how they want to be perceived by the outside world. And sounds to me like you're saying travel of the future is all about designing that into the offer so that people have that ability to pick up and promote their own self-brand, which is fixed around hospitality that they're visiting.
Yeah, and there's another thing, super important one that people often forget, is that there's a larger and larger number of Asian travelers in the hospitality industry now who don't really want to go on the beach. I've just come back. I came back from Vietnam. None of the Vietnamese ladies want to go and sprawl on the beach and get brown. That's the last thing they want. They're all about absolutely protecting their skin as much as they can. So I think there's also that changing, a little bit of a paradigm shift in the actual typology of the traveler. We're not just catering to an urban European market. There's a whole bunch of different people, and there's a huge number of middle class Asians and Chinese people who don't want to go on the beach, and the same probably to some extent with the Middle East.
In front of our eyes, it is all changing, Louis, and I think it's fantastic hearing about your projects. I'm just enthralled by them, and I can't wait to look some of those up that you've been talking about there, even though I know a few of those, some of them I don't. And I know that your designs are incredible, and how you guys think up your designs is also incredible. Your thought process, and I think I'll include some links in the show notes so that people listening to this can go and click through and have a look at some of those as well. But thank you so much for your time today. It's just been really great. Looking forward to maybe seeing you on the circuit. Are you going to be going to Montenegro?
Yeah, looking forward to hooking up with all of our pals at the Eco Resort Network.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll be there as well. So I look forward to chatting with you again then.
Okay. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.